So if you're willing to just jump right in, I do have a ton of questions, and so does Mike. So particularly in earlier sections of the book, you talk about what even now contemporarily we would consider the progressive thoughts surrounding criminal justice, this idea of humanizing the clients of the criminal justice system, so to speak. However, while this has been a more sociological perspective of crime and has been held in policing as an idea for quite a long time, going back to the 60s, according to your writing, it seems that after the crime control era, this perspective had a hard time getting off the ground policy-wise, and I was wondering what you thought about that. Have we moved the needle contemporarily, and have we moved it enough when it comes to this more progressive, humanistic idea of criminal justice and law enforcement?
Well, it's really a terrific question. And by the way, I was taken aback by the questions, you know, how important they are and how these issues should be addressed. It's really tough now at this point, sitting on the bench, you know. I never was a bench player. I was generally out in the field somewhere. Or managing the team. I did that. I won a Clarkstown softball championship managing, by the way. That's another place. Played center field on that same team. Anyway, what has been a very sad posture for law enforcement has been the fact that they still are pretty much working in isolation. In other words, it becomes, you know, me against them. And I think that's really sad. I was actually put on one of your competitors, Manhattanville, asked me to be on a panel, and it was all about, I was going to say defraud the police, take the police out of business, defund the police. And the four people that I was on the panel with were in that camp. Obviously, I was the opponent. After that, I think they did a podcast too. We were all on the same page. We weren't enemies, we weren't adversaries, we were together. I still believe that the police, unfortunately, in most instances, and there are exceptions in some cities, are still working in isolation. And they have not brought in the lawmakers, the politicians, not when something happens, a mass shooting or policeman does something they shouldn't do or whatever, and then they're there and the media there, and the politician rips the police, etc., and week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it's gone away. It's like we talked, Megan, about mass shootings. You know, over 500 mass shootings in the United States, over 2 a day in the United States. And the last one, 18 were killed, 13 injured. And it goes away. These things go away, and the politicians go on to other things, you know, beating each other up in Congress and all this other silly stuff. And we're getting killed. And our children are getting killed. And the dangers, even a college campus, homicides. This is, I mean, where are the police? Where are the law enforcement? Where are the lawmakers? The police have to be bringing in the community. Yes, some of them have these community council meetings, and quite honestly, I've seen them, having worked in a precinct. They're social, you know. They plan the Christmas party and all that kind of stuff. There has to be meaningful changes in policing, in the training, how they go about that. But they can't all be policemen sitting there watching this thing. We have to have lawmakers in and select members of the public to know what the police are up to. It doesn't make sense. One of the good things they did some years ago, NYPD did it, and that was, I forget what they called it, Crime City or something. Up in the police range, they set up a house like this. And what they did was they set it up that policemen had to go through it. They got a call about a loud party or something like that, and they come in and there's an argument going on and people are yelling and screaming, and a policeman there, and he said, well, the guy who started all trouble's in the bedroom. And they walk in the bedroom, they don't see nothing. All of a sudden, this guy jumps out of a closet and reaches to his waistband. And the cop, they had blanks. The cop shoots him. Okay? They had different scenarios around the house that the police had to deal with. And it was called shoot or don't shoot. And what they did also, NYPD, they let lawyers and judges go on police don't shoot. And they had to walk through this thing, and they were given a gun. They killed more people in that house than any police officer. What I'm saying is the public should come in to these facilities, to police agencies, police departments. One of the things they did years ago that was really good was the ride-along. That was really, really important, so you get a chance. You're there for that radio. And I'm going to get into a little bit more of that when we talk a little bit more about mental health. But police have to bring the public and the lawmakers in on a regular basis, not when something happens. It's when nothing is happening that you're in the planning stages. And if you will, the no surprise rule is in effect. So the public, what do you mean you do? This is part of what we're thinking about. Well, it really impacts the, all right, let's hear it. Listen. Don't tell all the time or direct, listen. And let the public be an active part of it. And one other thing I'd mention is the Police Executive Forum, which is in Washington, D.C., and they do a tremendous job. And they have a lot of successful programs that police agencies have put in place in many cities in the United States that they could give to local police to make them better. They have to get better. The training has to get better. The selection process has to be better. How does someone who has been involved in police shootings in one city goes to another state and becomes a police officer? What? We should be tracking these people. Once you become a police officer, we want to know if you've been involved in a number of shootings and if you've done things that you got fired in one place and now you're getting hired someplace else. Ridiculous. We've got to get, once again, the right people with the right training and get the public involved. They cannot do it in isolation. When I came in the research and planning unit, finally in the chief of detective's office, I finally got a chance to get behind the wheel and was able to make recommendations. One of the things that I pushed for, we were taking complaints about rape and sex crimes and all this kind of stuff, and we had all male detectives doing the work. Absolutely ridiculous. I was able to help form the sex crime analysis unit. Got a woman, a lieutenant, very, very competent. She became the commanding officer. We got a couple of sergeants, women, and we also had a male in there. He was super detective boss, great, great guy, and he was her right arm. We had women taking the complaints regarding rape and sex crimes and stuff like that. You know how that increased our business? You think we were looking to learn about more crime? Yes, we were. If it was happening, we wanted to know about it. That's why we're there. And those women working with the district attorney's office in New York, Linda Fairstein and other names that could drop, were absolutely critical in making sure that these cases, once they got to court, they were dealt with and they weren't just kicked to the side. It became so important. The program was adopted in a number of cities throughout the country because NYPD really is the laboratory for innovation. And it was really important that we be aggressive and use the resources that we're given. I'm sorry, I'm going on and on.
Oh, no, it's okay.
That's a great answer, yeah.
And you mentioned how you worked by yourself and other team, and it doesn't matter the aspect, but what was the most memorable event that happened during the NYPD, and what was like the most craziest aspect to that event?
Well, I tell you, probably one of the most memorable that happened with me was I had made lieutenant, and I worked in the 19th precinct on the east side of Manhattan, right across from the Russian mission. And I got to deal with the Russians on almost an everyday basis because the JDL, the Jewish Defense League, was protesting about the treatment of Jews in Russia. And Maya Gahani, he was a famous, if you will, forgive me, troublemaker at the time. And the lead Russian was a guy by the name of Moroshkin, Ivan Moroshkin. He was a 6'3", prototypical Russian. I mean, very strong, brutal guy. And it was the year that the USA hockey team beat Russia. And the fire department across the way from the Russian mission, they were right next to the police station. They put up a big banner with the score, USA, Russia. And Moroshkin wasn't happy about that at all. He wanted me to have it taken down. But it turned out that Ivan Moroshkin was the lead Soviet spy in the United States at that time. And I would deal with him at least 2 times a week. He'd come over to my office. And when they had their May Day celebration at their mission, myself and the precinct commander were invited. Well, what would happen every time Moroshkin would come to my office in the 19th precinct, I had an office on the 2nd floor, he'd come up and we'd have conversations. It was during the Jimmy Carter presidency, and there was a kind of detente, they called it. We were friends with Russia at the time. And he invited us to the May Day celebration at the mission. Every time that Moroshkin would leave the 19th precinct and go back to the mission, 2 FBI agents would come into the 19th precinct. What did he talk about? What did he say? Et cetera, et cetera. Like I had information. Well, when they heard we were being invited to the May Day Communist celebration, they had 1 or 2 questions that they wanted me to try and slip into the conversation with this Russian spy. So yeah, they were kind of innocuous questions, but anyway, I wanted to be a secret agent, so I figured I'll do it. So we go over, and they had a long reception line, had to meet and shake hands, and they had Russian soldiers in full uniform, 3 or 4 of them in the room. I mean, it was like being in Moscow. Anyway, as soon as I got off the line, Moroshkin, right over to the bar. I had more vodka. I probably set the USA record for most vodkas within 5 minutes. And Moroshkin just had the guy keep pouring. Well, needless to say, the FBI questions, I still don't remember what they were. I, quite honestly, staggered out of that Russian mission. I don't recall any food or any, and they gave me 2 bottles of vodka. I'll never forget that. And I'm in full uniform, right? I'm not feeling, good thing I wasn't driving. Anyway, walk across to the precinct, and the lieutenant on the desk, I went up and I handed him 1 bottle of vodka, and the other one was going to go home with me. But I went directly up, that we had a dormitory on the 2nd floor, and in full uniform, caught some sleep. But that was my one try. But Moroshkin, later on, when I got into the terrorist task force, became a very important guy. That's another story. I'm sorry. Next question.
That was an incredible section of the book, by the way. Once you guys read it, it really was an interesting passage to read, and you really have the ability to create that imagery of slamming the vodka bottle down.
Well, yeah, you talk about, now what was that, the last part was crazy, something crazy to happen? Well, yeah, one crazy thing was I was a sergeant in the chief of detective's office, and turned out I had been there for 4 years. I was only supposed to be there for 2, but unfortunately the chief liked me, so he kept me for 4 years. I wanted out of it because it was all the way down the end of Manhattan. I'm traveling from Rockland, so not working very well. So I went into him first thing. I said, I need to get back in the street. I said, I've been here 4 years. I got to get back out. He said, all right, fine. And next day, I'm transferred to the 8th Homicide Squad in the Bronx, which was interesting. The first Son of Sam homicide was committed in the 8th homicide in the 43rd precinct. Donna Loria was the name who was killed. So I had to give a presentation on the police and the media. That's another part of my career I'll talk about. I worked with CBS for almost 3 years on a television show segment called Police File. That's another story. But anyway, so I had to go up and give a presentation to detectives about working with the media, etc. And I was all duded up, suit, because I was going directly to 8th Homicide after that. So I did the presentation, jumped in my car, and headed for the Bronx. I get up to the Bronx, 43rd Precinct, and I get up to the 8th Homicide. Everybody's running around crazy. There had been a shooting this morning with some drug gangs, okay? So everybody's kind of running different directions. I didn't even get a chance to introduce myself, even though I was the best dressed guy in the room. But anyway, 3 or 4 of them were running out to go to a scene of where the shooting happened. And so I just jumped in the parade and went with these guys. They opened up the car, I jumped in the back seat. And these guys aren't even talking to me. They don't even know who the hell I'm. They figure I'm some spy from headquarters, the way I was dressed and all. And again, I was a sergeant. These guys were all detectives. So anyway, I was keeping my mouth closed and just following instructions. And we get to this house on Bronx River Avenue, if you're familiar with the Bronx. I mean, it was really in bad shape, but a lot of old apartments. Anyway, we go in there, and the apartment down a long hall, and go in there, and they open up the closet, and there's a trunk. And they open up the trunk, cocaine like you never saw in your life. I mean, over $1 million in cocaine, this big black trunk. So they say, all right, we got to go get a search warrant, et cetera, et cetera. Who's going to hold down the apartment? So I said, well, I'm not busy, so you'll stay? I said, yeah, sure. So they said, okay, look, there'll be a cop outside on the street by the front door, so you'll be fine. We're going to go to the DA's office, get the search warrant. So they take off. They leave me with a woman, and she had like a 4-month-old baby. And she wasn't happy to see me at all. If stairs could kill, I would have been dead. She would walk around with the baby and start to go near the closet, and I'd give it a look. And one time I started like I was going to go after her, and she backed off. I figure, okay, here I am. Look at this. Best dressed guy in the building. Knock on the door. I go to the door, and this will show you, I was almost 4 years in the chief of detective's office, and maybe forgot what the street was about. I look through the peephole, and I don't see anybody. And I open the door, and just then, this guy, who had hair like Samson, down to his shoulders, about 6 foot tall, 66-inch shoulders, a 33-inch waist. He looked like a monster, about 6 foot tall. And I'm looking at him, he's looking at me, and I'm going into my pocket. And we used to keep our shields on a chain, okay, because if you lost it, it cost you 5 days' pay. So I got the chain, and I'm pulling on this chain, and I'm looking at this guy, and I'm thinking, this ain't good. And he's looking at me with this chain thing. Somebody said it was like a magician looking for the rabbit in the hat or something. Anyway, finally get the shield, but he's not impressed. Anyway, this woman, now there's a wall. He's on the other side of the wall. I'm at the front door. This wall, this woman starts to go towards the closet again. And I look over, really stern at her, and she stops. And she goes back. That look at that woman may have saved my life. This guy says in Spanish, where's my friend? Where's my friend? I don't know why I did it, but I did it. I pushed out at the guy. I thought it was the Man of Steel. I tell you, this guy was, I mean, he was built. I pushed back. Finally, he stepped back, and I stepped out of the apartment. And he's staring at me, and I'm staring at him. Now, I'm remembering that there's a cop outside, but what happened was the bad guys up on the roof called in a 1013, assist police officer, and this cop took off and jumped in his police car and drove away. I'm hoping to God that this cop is going to come in this hallway, and I'm staring at him, and we're only about 2 or 3 feet from each other, just staring at each other. And I start to do a little bit of a cha-cha up the hall, and he joins in on the cha-cha. We're going up the hall just staring at each other. And the hall was about the distance, maybe the other side of that desk. And I can see when he moves his jacket, he's got a gun in his belt. And I can see it's a detective 5-shot special, the exact same gun that I had. And I'm thinking to myself, if I go for my gun and he goes for his, we're both dead. So we get to the end of the hall, still doing this cha-cha. And as soon as we get to the end of the hall, I reach, without taking my eyes off him, I'm watching him the whole time and he's watching me. And I turn the knob and it comes off in my hand. And I don't change my look, I don't say anything. I drop the doorknob and we start the same cha-cha back and get to the end of the hall. Well, my colleagues who went to the DA's office, on their way there, they hear about this 1013, and they said, oh my God, they called something in, that guy's in trouble. And they raced back. We got to the end of the hall, and I didn't know what was going to happen next. Next thing, the front door, hallway door, is kicked in, and these 2 guys come running in. 2 of them got shotguns, and he looks, I reach over and I grab his gun, take out my own, and they come out, they put him on his knees, and he's locked up. They called him teenager in the street, and his name was Jaime Villa. And Jaime Villa, I testified against him in state court and federal court, and he was a real nasty guy. And he probably killed close to 30 people. His first killing he did at 12. He killed his lawyer in a car, put a couple of bullets in his head because he thought he was talking and giving him up in certain ways. Anyway, when he would be sitting in the courtroom getting ready, when I was about to testify on the stand, he would be mean-spirited, etc., etc. When I got into the story about this dance, he just sat there with a smile and just shaking his head, knowing he should have killed me. He didn't need a gun to kill me. It turned out he was a New York State black belt in karate. He had been in a Green Beret, went to Vietnam, ended up getting involved with setting up a drug organization. He married some colonel's daughter and did all kinds of, this guy was unbelievable. But that crazy event, my first day in homicide, I almost got killed. So that was the crazy event.
It was a fascinating read, and I think it was even more fascinating to hear you retell it in person, I'm not going to lie. I do want to ask about your experiences moving to the 2-5, and particularly in your Good Guys chapter, you talk about ADA Ken Conboy and this idea of being grilled in front of this grand jury regarding everything that was happening with the corruption. And particularly, your imagery is really powerful in the book, and it very much felt like I was sitting there watching you experience this very adversarial and stressful situation. I mean, it seemed like you felt isolated, you were being questioned. And I was wondering, particularly with this idea of this initial distrust of your integrity, how did you get through that? How did it make you feel? And also, how did you overcome that almost isolated feeling, particularly being in law enforcement?
Megan, that was probably one of the worst times of my career because I was, as you might suspect, somewhat idealistic. I believed in doing the right thing and all that kind of good stuff. And I came to East Harlem, looking again to make a difference. And I was only here a very short time, and I ended up, Sergeant said, "Oh, they're only working two-handed tonight. Maybe you could help." Well, I had worked with other detectives two-handed. I was only there a couple of months, so I was still the new guy on the block. And about 3:30 in the morning, there was a homicide over by 117th Street and Pleasant Avenue. And there had been this guy, Desiderio Caban by name, had gotten drugs from a couple of these organized crime guys, and apparently he wasn't paying. He was working down the Garment District, and he was selling drugs down there, and they were taking care of him, and he apparently missed a couple of payments. And he went into a bar down Pleasant Avenue Tavern, and it turns out these two guys, Arnold Squitieri and Alphonse Siska, organized crime guys, saw him as soon as he walked in, and he ran. And they jumped in their Cadillac, and they chased him, and he ran to the corner of 117th First. This was about 3:15 in the morning. And Squitieri jumped out of his car and fired 4 or 5 shots, hit him in the back, and he went down, his face down on a sewer, jumped in a car. Well, it turned out there was a police car. The Delightful Coffee Shop was on the corner of 116th Street. And there was a police officer sitting in the car. His partner was in getting coffee for the two of them. I don't know whether he heard the shots or not, but he saw this car peel out of 117th Street, going up First Avenue, and he told me later on that morning when I was interviewing him, the car stalled. I was trying to get it going, but there's a carbon buildup in these cars because of the slow driving during the tour. And I knew that to be true, that did happen with the cars, because many guys would start the tour and go up on the highway and give it a good run to try and clean it out. But anyway, he said by the time he got to 118th Street, the car had made the turn and was gone out of sight. So he just went up 118th Street, circled the block, didn't see the car, came back around, went to where the body was. His partner was already there, and the body was taken to the hospital. I responded to the hospital with 2 detectives, and these guys were kind of ignoring me. They're like, they didn't talk, they're just quiet. I knew something was strange, but I wasn't sure. And he told me this quick story about he was unable to make the apprehension. So I went back to the scene. Of course, at that hour in the morning, there's nobody around, etc. So I had to do a report on the whole thing for the chief of detectives, send a report. So now I'm sitting in the 25th Precinct Detective Squad and doing this thing. And I had been in court all day. That was I forgot to tell you. And I had come in to do a little paperwork before I went home. Well, the sergeant grabbed me and said, "Could you come in tonight?" He says, you don't have to come in right at 5 o'clock, but if you get in about 6, 7, I'd be... And being a rookie, yes, sure, Sarge, absolutely. When? Yeah, maybe I'd start now. I mean, that's the kind of, forgive me, dope I was at the time. Anyway, I ended up catching that case, and I'm sitting there. It's now probably 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, and I haven't slept in God knows when, and I'm typing out this report. And we had typewriters that all you did was hunt and peck. And next thing, this police officer comes in, and he was one of the cops who also responded to the shooting. He wasn't in the car. He wasn't one of the 2 that were assigned that area. He was in an adjoining sector. He came in, and he was kind of a, forgive the French, like to break, you know what, calling me, you know, hey, young detective, what are you going to do? You're going to break this case? You're going to get it done, kid? You're going to get the shield, the whole thing? I mean, really going after. And I was exhausted and not really looking for that kind of conversation. And I stopped typing and I leaned over that typewriter and I said to him, you can bet your ass I'm going to solve this case. And all of a sudden, he backs out. He's white in the face. He backs up and next turns and takes off. And I'm like, you know, obviously very tired. And I'm saying, what did I say? That morning, driving home, I couldn't get it out of my mind. What did I say? Why did he react that way? This is crazy. And so I said, I'm tired. I guess, you know, I overreacted. I didn't see what I thought I saw. Well, long story short, what happened was this cop in the car by himself did catch up with the two shooters on Pleasant Avenue, okay? He had them at gunpoint. And this guy who was breaking my chops that morning pulled up in a car and said those famous words, he's good people, meaning there's Arnold Squitieri and his partner. And the cop puts away his gun, and Squitieri says, I'll take care of you guys, etc. And that night, they threw $3,000 into the back of the police car that this guy who was breaking my chops took and split with the other two guys. I'll have to cut this short because we're running out of time, but basically I came up with a 15-year-old kid who I nicknamed Charlie Brown because I didn't want his real name to be out there. And he happened to see what happened initially. He saw the shooting, and he told me that the police car did give chase and was almost on the bumper of the car that had done that was occupied by the guys who did the shooting. So I, at that time, realized I not only have a homicide to solve, but I got a police corruption as well. And I was like brand new, and nobody really knew me, what I was about, etc. And I felt the world on my shoulders. And I worked really, I was very aggressive. I pushed really hard, and eventually I got the name. It took probably 4 or 5 months, got the name. But in the meantime, the NAP Commission, which was doing an investigation of NYPD, and IAD were investigating this case. And this one guy that they wired, the NAP Commission wired up, he was talking to these guys over a period of time. You know, say, hey, you made a score, etc., etc. Well, they said, yeah, we made a good score. And during that conversation, this cop that's wired up, who was crooked as hell, said to them, what about the kid in the squad? How much did he get? And the guy who had come up to me that morning and was breaking my chops, he said to this guy, don't say anything about that guy. He said, he'll lock us all up. Well, that was good. And the NAP Commission held on to that tape. They never told IAD that they had the tape. IAD was thinking, as did NAP Commission originally, I got a piece of the action. And I had to go, and I volunteered to go to IAD without an attorney, etc., etc. And I thought, you know, they were looking at me like I was in on the action, you know. The cops got theirs and the detective got his. And that was the furthest thing from the truth. And there was nobody talking to me, and everybody knew that NAP Commission and IAD were interested in me. But one thing I always did, and if any of you get in criminal justice, and I would tell people this, I'd have really tough nights sometimes in the police department. I would leave my armor at the bridge. In other words, when I went over that George Washington Bridge, come back up to Congress at the time was where I was living, I didn't take my troubles home. I didn't want my wife and my kids to be living with this kind of pressure. My daughters, when I did the book, they said they couldn't believe it. They said, he used to come home, play ball, and rah, 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 rah. Yeah, I did. But let me tell you something. As Megan said, it was one of the really worst times. One of the things, two things got me out of it. My Catholic faith, I knew where the churches were. And I believed and I prayed, and it was a very lonely time. And I didn't share it. I had a brother, thank God, that was in a PD, an unbelievable guy. And I had him. So it was critical. That's really what got me through. And IAD, again, well, I went there and they questioned me, interrogated me. Then they ended up taking me to the Rackets Bureau, and some young DA questions me for another couple of hours, and I can't believe it. And finally, he leans over the desk and he said to me, okay, here's the deal. You're going to go back to the precinct and the detective squad, and you're going to wear a wire, and you're going to get everything we need. That's what you're going to do. And I was sitting in a chair and listening to him. I can't believe what he was saying. And I leaned over towards him and I said, I'll do it. But I said, I want you to wear a wire and go back and talk with all the lawyers and judges, and then the two of us will come here and exchange notes. He looked at me like I was crazy, man. And maybe I was at that moment. And all of a sudden he stood up and he said, we're done here. And got up and walked out. And this lieutenant from IAD, who was a real tough guy, I could see just a little crack of a smile on his face. But even with all of that, they put me before a grand jury, and they had 3 different ADAs trying to make sure that I was legitimate and I hadn't done anything. And I couldn't believe it. The 3 officers came to the grand jury the same day as me. We went to get on the elevator with the DA from the Rackets Bureau, and this was another DA, and the 2 officers from Internal Affairs, and who's on the elevator? I couldn't believe it. This is like a movie. The 3 cops that were involved. And we step on the elevator, and I said, look at this. Was this a plant? What happened? We go up to the grand jury, get off the elevator. They called their names, and they said, we're not testifying. Their lawyer came up, and the 3 of them walked out, and they called my name next. And I went in, and I was in there for probably over 2.5 hours. Go bing, 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 bing. And I said, you know, when is this going to end? And when I walked out, this ADA convoy, who was head of the Records Bureau, real sharp guy, walked over to me and stuck out his hand and said, let's go to work. And we went up to his office, and again, eventually I made the arrests, and I got the people, and life went on. Fortunately, I made sergeant. And the career went. They sent me to New Orleans for 3 months. I don't know whether it was for arrest or what, to work with the New Orleans police, and I got involved down there too, and all this. I mean, it was just, you know, I couldn't make it up. But like I said, I worked with really a lot of good people, and I had a great family, and I knew who put me here. So it's been an exciting life. But the good part about it is getting to talk with people like yourselves. You're going on, and you're going to face challenges, and you're going to not know where to turn or how to handle things like that. But stick with your principles, stay true to yourself, and just keep on going, and it'll work out. It'll work out. You'll figure a way out how to do it and do it right. And that's really it. I always felt, you know, wherever I was, I mean, I was no hero. I had a lot of other situations I got involved in where I had to go, the U.S. Attorney was going after ATF and looking to break up ATF, and they brought in a special Washington prosecutor, and they weren't given immunity. I had witnessed something, and they weren't given immunity. My lawyer says, you can't go in, you got to get immunity. I said, I got to go in because I was one of the people responsible. I was one of the ranking officers there that day. I have to go in. And I did. And it was rough going. But this U.S. attorney, the lead guy, he became almost an admirer of mine. And I was looking to go to the FBI Academy, and they were holding it up because of this investigation. And I asked him, and I said, he says, thanks for coming in. I appreciate it. You know, you're doing it without immunity, and you tell everybody else they got immunity. Not a problem. So I said to him, would you do me a favor? He says, what's that? He says, if you know anybody in the FBI, could you let them know that I cleared the hurdles here? And he said, I'll see what I can do. The next day I got a call from the FBI. I was in the first class in January for 3 months. So, you know, taking the risk really paid off. And again, when you see how things kind of fit together, and I'm sorry, I'm
It's totally understandable, particularly because I think this is a really good segue into a conversation about law enforcement mental health, particularly when it comes to this idea that this was such a difficult time in your life, and while you had coping strategies with it, what would you say to officers that are confronted with mental health stressors on the job, particularly?
Well, I think what I was thinking about, and I hadn't thought about this, it happened in the 60s. I was assigned to a police car. I had a terrific partner. And one night for a 4 to 12, they told me, hey, you're going to have a passenger tonight. And there was a young woman, and she was about 25, 30 years old. And she worked for the Karen Horney Clinic, which was a treatment center. And they were doing a study on the police. And she was going to ride with us for about 3 hours and go on assignments with us and everything like that. And she did, and it turned out to be a very busy night. I mean, we were on rooftops, and she went, and we had a shooting at a liquor store and a big fight in the street. I mean, all kinds of craziness. And at the end of the night, after her 3 hours were up, and we were dropping her off at the subway, she turned to me and my partner. She says, you know, she says, I do this for 3 hours twice a week, and working for this clinic on mental health, etc. She said, I can't go home and go to bed. I'm so wound up with being part of this and seeing it, etc., etc. She said, I don't know how policemen do it. I have to call a friend, go have a drink or something. I mean, she said, I have to find some escape because I can't sit and be thinking about all that went on and what could have happened and the dangers involved. She says, it was an unbelievable experience and has been, but I can kind of more understand about police officers and some of the issues that you face. I was talking to my daughter before I came here tonight. I said, would you check on this clinic? It's still in business and has a whole, in fact, yes, he is. I'm going to recommend that we call, that the boss here calls or somebody from staff would call and talk with the carrier. I imagine they would be, and if you look them up on Google, they would be absolutely terrific. They have offices, I think, 62nd Street, and what they treat is just right in line with what we were talking about at our meeting the other night. I mean, it just, talk about a perfect fit. And I hadn't thought about this since the 60s. I just remember her telling me that. And so the stresses. And again, I think I roll back on, I had a tremendous, fortunately, I lost my wife some years ago, in '03. And she was the girl across the street in the South Bronx. And I met her when I was very young. I actually would have met her when I was a lot younger, but my mom wouldn't let me cross the street. But best looking blonde on the block. And she was just absolutely terrific and just truly devoted her life to me and the kids. She was much smarter than I was, just so supportive. Be all you could be. And I told her when I was getting to the end of the terrorist task force and I didn't have anything lined up at that point, I said, you know, honey, I said, I may be out of work for about 6 months, a year. She said, you'll do fine. I mean, that's coming home and obviously carrying some of the baggage from the city, but not sharing it. She just knew when things were getting tough, and just stayed perfect the whole time. It was an amazing relationship, and I have 2 sons in the FBI. Apple didn't fall far from the tree, and my oldest daughter works with blind children. She's a visually rehabilitation specialist, and now is so good at what she does. She's a consultant and doing really well, but she got brought in by the School for the Deaf in Valhalla because they didn't have a very good visually program. She's doing unbelievable work. So she not only had to learn, what do they call it, Braille, she had to learn sign language. So, I mean, it's terrific. She's doing great. My other daughter, autistic children, a teacher in the South Bronx, and it's, the kids are, I mean, they're terrific. They're really great, and it's all about service. And that's really what the career is about. It's about service. And reflecting back and hopefully making a difference. But one of the best things, and I'll wrap here, I had the Manhattan Robbery Squad. I was commanding officer. I had a nice office, 2nd floor, upstairs in the 13th precinct. I had about 50, 60 detectives. I had 4 or 5 sergeants and interesting cases. I was only here about a year, and I was really happy. And the chief of detectives and the police commissioner really didn't get along. And I get this call one morning when I'm at my desk from the chief of detectives. He says, what do you know about the terrorist task force, the FBI task force? I didn't even know they had one. He said, did you put in for it? I said, no. Okay. He hangs up the phone. 5 minutes later, I get a call from the police commissioner, Bob McGuire. Yes, sir. Kevin, today's Thursday, Monday morning, 8 o'clock, you be at FBI headquarters. You are new commander of the NYPD Joint Terrorism Task Force, which had been in business for about a year. Yes, sir. I think that's when my final words said, my God, I mean, I didn't know anything about terrorism. And that morning, next Monday morning, I reported at FBI headquarters. And when I got there, I remember going up on the elevator. It turned out to be a very attractive agent. And she gets up at the 26th floor, which I knew where I had to go. And me and her are the only 2 in the elevator. She gets off. She starts punching in the combination to get through the door. And I'm standing next to her, and she says, who are you? I'm Lieutenant Hallinan, my shield, my ID. She said, what are you doing here? I said, I've been assigned to the terrorist task force. And she looks at me, okay. We walk in. She takes me to the FBI boss's office. And, oh, Kevin, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. She says to Barry Moore, the FBI supervisor, you know this guy? Yeah, I know him. I know him. By the way, here's your new boss. She goes, oh, my God, what a way to meet him. Well, what happened was we met with the head guy in the office, had brief explanation of our duties, and then back they gave me where I was going to sit, which was like 3 blocks in another zip code in the building, a federal building. I said, what the heck is this? The task force was this way. So they had all these old case things on my desk, and these agents are sitting around saying, who the hell is this guy? So I sat there for about 5 minutes, and I said, this is crazy. I picked up the phone, and I called the supervisor that had just been introduced. I says, hey, Barry, we need to meet with Ken Walton again. He was the head guy. He said, what's up? I said, I'll tell you when we get there. So we get back to his office, and what's up, Kevin? Everything all right? I said, Ken, I said, You know, obviously I'm really pleased about being here. It's very exciting, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, I'm not looking to lead this parade, but I certainly want to be part of it. And from 2 blocks down, my office, he says, hold on a second. He picked up the phone, he called, put Kevin's office back to back with his counterpart in the FBI, right in the middle of the office. And that statement, he told me later, he says, I knew you were here to do business. You weren't here just to hang out, to have an FBI credential. And that job at the FBI Terrorist Task Force, we were working 8 different groups actively in unbelievable situations. I was taken, I had halfway through to a master's in communications because I had been involved in television. I won't get involved with that, but I was part of an Emmy-winning award thing. I worked at CBS. I mean, I had a desk there for a while. I mean, it was crazy, but great. That FBI assignment, I knew, was going to put me in an even greater if I elected to leave. And I wanted to be the chief of detectives, so I wasn't planning on going anywhere. The city went broke as I was talking with the president. And President Ford at the time said to New York City, drop dead, you're not getting any money. So I knew I had to go get a real job. So I'll kind of break at that. I'm sorry, I'm burning your ears, forgive me.
No, it's all good. You explained to us how you had the best seat in the house, in the office at the FBI, and I have the best seat here. And our next question is, what was the biggest learning experience outside of the field and working in New York City? So was it going to like New Orleans, Quantico, or speaking at different conferences, such as the Olympics?
Yes, going to New Orleans at that time, in fact, it was interesting with the JFK anniversary coming up, November 22nd. When I went to New Orleans, I went as part of a federal program, the Department of Justice, a middle management exchange, they call it. A captain, a lieutenant, and a sergeant would go, there'd be an exchange. I went with the captain and lieutenant, I was a sergeant, and 3 New Orleans, same rank, came to New York City. And one of the guys who came got mugged in Central Park the second day, which was kind of ironic. But while I was in New Orleans, they had these parades, they had the spring parade, you know, just before Fat Tuesday or whatever that thing is. And I met Jim Garrison. Does anybody know the name Jim Garrison? I'll give you a hint. He was a district attorney in New Orleans. Jim Garrison, long before your time, Jim Garrison, after President Kennedy was killed, alleged that he knew was responsible. He had an investigation, and they say money came from all over the United States into the district attorney's office, you know, and I don't know where the money went, but that's another story. And Garrison, it turned out, was a fraud, you know, just looking for publicity. He had no evidence whatsoever. He charged some guy, and the case was dismissed, etc. I met Hale Boggs. Hale Boggs was a U.S. House of Representative, was in the House of Representatives. His daughter became a great news commentator years later. He disappeared over Alaska in a plane. They never found him. They gave us a convertible and put New York City police, and they gave us doubloons to throw to the crowd, etc., etc. I mean, and the police treated us really well. Lived in a French Quarter. It was the time of your life. And we found a book, The Underground Gourmet of the Best Restaurants in New Orleans. And we hit every one of them. And it was just, I got involved working with the Urban Squad, which was working out down at the Desire Housing Project, which was an area which the Black Panthers were in at the time. They actually had fought with the police and everything like that, to the point that the police chief in New Orleans rolled in a tank when they had to go in and make arrests in a Desire housing project. Well, this urban squad that I was working with was a sergeant and 10 police officers who were looking to make a difference in that area. It was a ghetto. And what the police did, these guys were committed not to necessarily arresting people, they were looking to help. They got the sanitation department in there to start doing, they got the lighting, they started working with the community. And the Panthers were very angry because the community was kind of looking at these police in a whole different way because they cared about the people. And it was showing by what they were doing. And that was a really terrific experience to see about making a difference because they were. It was also one day I got a call from Johnny Miller from the urban squad. He says, "You got to come to my office right away." I went, and he said, one of my police officers who has a photographic memory was on a bus coming into work. And there was a guy on the bus that he believed he had seen before, knew the face, etc. Couldn't pick. And he came in, and there was a wanted poster. He was wanted for killing 2 New York City police officers, Piagentini and Jones, in the 60s. It was 12 police officers in 1 year were killed, point blank. And this guy was one of the people responsible. Well, for the next week, we rode that bus, and we did, hoping that we didn't catch him, but sure enough, probably 6, 8 months later, this guy who had been seen in a wanted poster was arrested in New Orleans. So that policeman actually had seen a guy who was responsible. But the interaction in New Orleans, working with the different units, really made a difference. I was able to take a program back to New York, 2 or 3 programs. I had a write-up. You had to submit a report every week to Justice. And one of the best programs I found was Operation Fence. What they did in New Orleans, they were getting killed with burglary. So what they did was they set up a warehouse and they started buying stolen property. And they set up cameras of the people who were coming in and selling your stolen property. And I'll never forget it. They had a big German Shepherd as you came in the door, and a guy sitting with a shotgun. So none of these bad guys were going to think of ripping the place off. They had it going for about 3 months. I mean, they bought boats. Unbelievable merchandise of stolen property that was coming in. And then what they did was they put the word out that they were running a big party because the business was so successful. Well, I was invited to the party, and what they did was they had lights put up. They got the best looking police officers to come in, and music and the whole thing in this warehouse. All right, so look, and they were told, their customers were told, no guns. Don't anybody bring a gun in. We're going to supply taxi cabs in the French Quarter. You don't have to bring your car, jump in a cab, and cab will take you right there and back. Okay? I became a cab driver. And they were coming, amazing. What they did was, they came to the front door, the music, they had a couple of beautiful women meet them at the door, etc., etc. Anyway, as they walked into the music, etc., lights will go, and as soon as they went in, freeze! Police had them surrounded. They were taken into another area, fingerprinted, photographed, etc. Every one of those guys that they arrested never went to trial, because when their lawyers came in saying they were going to plead them not guilty, hold on, we want to show you a video. And there was their guy taking the money for the property that he stole. It was a terrific program. I brought that back to New York. And they did 3 different, they did one in Manhattan, they did one in Queens, and they did one in Bronx, and had tremendous success. So that all came out of New Orleans.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to New York for a minute again, particularly when it comes to the later 1970s and the way you discuss it in your book. You talk a lot about the idea of it being a turning point for the city, not just for the crime. You talk about it being a turning point for the city, not just for the crime rates, for the economy, but also how the media really portrayed crime and how it portrayed law enforcement when it came to what was old news with crime, what was mentioned, what made headlines, what didn't. And particularly you write about the fact that the Son of Sam garnered national attention, but this rise, particularly in violent crime, didn't. And this idea that violent crime filled police ledgers, and yet it wasn't really what was driving media attention. And I was curious, how do you think the media attention of this time period impacted policing? And then also, do you particularly think police interactions with the communities that you were serving were changed by the way that this media portrayal of crime happened in the city?
Yeah, what happened, and actually I mentioned it briefly, when I got to the Chief of Detective's office, and again the name of the unit was Research and Planning, I was there a couple of months and involved in some programs, and my boss, I was a sergeant at that time, lieutenant, came in and says, "Guess what, you got a new assignment." I says, "What am I doing?" He says, "You're going up to CBS. You have a meeting with the station news director." I said, "What for?" He said, "They want to talk about getting involved with the police and trying to be helpful." And I said, "So how did I get this?" He says, "The chief of detectives said you look good in a suit. So that's how you got the job." I said, "Look at this." So I went up to CBS, and at the meeting was the news director, a guy by the name of Tony Hatch, and a former New York detective who had been in narcotics and was one of the best reporters in New York. He was very, very popular in New York. His name was Chris Borgen, and he was terrific. He left probably with about 14 years, after 14 years in the PD. And Ed Joyce, who was the president of CBS, came into the meeting. I'm saying, "Look at this is deep water." And they said, "We want you to help design this." And I'm thinking, who the heck am I? I'm a producer or a director? What? They said, "We want to get the public involved." And I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, you know, we can do two things. We can do obviously some unsolved cases. We can maybe put in a couple of wanted pictures of people that we're looking for and get public interest. And also, we can show how some of these crimes occur. And this way, we're being educational for the public. We're not only showing, obviously, the horror of crime, but we're showing what these people do so the public is more aware of these scams and things that were going on." And that was a big part of it, too. Confidence games. People were ripping off senior citizens and everything like that. Well, what my job was to do, I would select the cases that would be put on television. So I realized right away that I didn't want the police department to be embarrassed by putting on a case that the detective really hadn't done a lot of work on, and we're asking the public, and then it's something very obvious that the detective should have known. There was an eyewitness or something. So I had to investigate each case as if it was my case. And then I'd bring in a detective and I'd talk with him and I'd question him. So it was a lot of work involved. And we got on the air 3 times a week as part of the 6 and 11 o'clock news. It was about a 3 to 4 minute segment in which we would go to the scene of the crime, show what happened, etc., etc. And if we had a suspect, we'd show the suspects, police are looking to speak with so-and-so. Well, we were on for about 2 to 3 weeks, 3 times a week. and we're not getting a lot of action. I said, oh, this is going in the toilet. We did a confidence game. 3 women who were doing these confidence games and had ripped off senior citizens big time. We showed the game, what they do to senior citizens, etc., which was really educational, and then we showed their 3 pictures. That night, their lawyer called and said that the women were coming back from Mexico, and were going to be arraigned in Queens. They would come to the courthouse with their attorney. And we couldn't believe it. So we go to the courthouse and they're not there. I go into the courthouse. The judge is like half asleep going through the different cases. And finally, one of my detectives comes running in and he says, Kevin, quick, come outside. And here come the 3 women marching up the block with their attorney. Well, Chris Borgen had a camera crew there. Right away, they started shooting. And they're surrendering to me and Borgen. And we go in with the 3 women. And as soon as, I'll never forget this, as soon as the judge saw Borgen and the camera crew, all of a sudden, all right, let's have some order in this courtroom. And, he was play acting. Well, that was the beginning of a winning streak. Almost every show, every other show, we would put pictures on, etc. We made something like probably about 15, 20 arrests within a month and a half. I mean, it was amazing. And public were calling in, and what happened was, too, we found out, particularly women calling about assaults and stuff like that, we were getting more crime statistics as well. We were finding out what was going on. I mean, it was an unbelievable experience. And CBS was so happy with it because the ratings were going up. The sponsors wanted their spots around this segment. We were on at 11 o'clock. Well, what happened? We're only on about a month. And the news director came to me and said, we want you to be on a show. I said, what do you mean? He said, we want you to be on the 11 o'clock segment, and we want you to, Chris is going to ask you, did public call, blah, 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 and I'd give, like 40 seconds of, yes, we got a number of calls, we got good leads, whatever I said. But I was on TV, and they got it down to 2 nights a week. So 2 nights a week I was on TV, and they had these mini cams. They came down to our office, and they did all the shooting there. So I figured I'd be in the movies or something like that. There was a career opportunity. Anyway, you talk about having religion. There was a Marino priest that my wife and I were very close with. He had done some work at a parish, and then he was in Latin America, and he got arrested in Latin America because the police, he was organizing the people and everything like that, and they took exception, and they put him in jail for a couple of days. And he really never got over it. So he wanted to have dinner with us this particular night, so we went down to the city, and we had dinner with him. He says, hey, what's with you? You keep looking at your watch. I says, the Emmy Awards are on tonight. I said, and we've been nominated, this police file show. Oh, really, really? Oh, let's go back. We go back to the, what do they call it, where the priests were living in the parish. He was in a parish house. And he did say, how about some wine? So we got some wine. And the Emmy Awards came on, and Police File was in competition, and the winner is Police File. And Tony Hatch goes up to get the award, and he says, I want to thank, the police commissioner for blah, blah, blah. I particularly want to thank Sergeant Kevin Hallinan. I said, see, that is praise to come to the church to make sure you're going to win the Emmy and get spoken about. But that went on for over 2 years. And when I was getting ready to leave the chief of detective's office, ABC called me, and they wanted me to put together a show for them. So I told the chief, look, I'll do it, but I got to exit stage right. I even got to give it a name. It was called Crime Call. And got it started, and Geraldo Rivera and all that kind of stuff. I won't go through all of that, but we got that going. But that show and getting the public involved really made a difference, because it was not only conference games, it was violent crimes, it was homicides. I mean, there was one guy, we showed his picture, and it turned out that he had been shot and killed like a week before in the street. And I mean, we were putting on a dead man's picture. But and we got a kid that was kidnapped by the father and got the kid back and got him back. He came back Thanksgiving Day. The cameras were there, and we got, I mean, there were a lot of bank robbers, a number of bank robbers, because we had the tapes and everything like that. And then there was a guy who was holding up grocery stores, A&Ps and those stores. The guy was about 300 pounds. I mean, he was really heavy, etc., etc. And he wasn't wearing a mask or anything like that. He was arrested before the 11 o'clock show because of what he looked like. And he saw the show, and he knew it. He says, I'm dead, I'm gone. And sure enough, they got him about 9 o'clock at night. Yeah. Somebody called and said, you're looking for Fatso so-and-so.
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about, community engagement with police and also new use of technology too.
Yeah, so have you seen the start? You've seen the start of technology and the use of law enforcement. Did it make agency life easier with the use, or did it create problems in technology in law enforcement?
When I started in policing, when I was put on the street as a police officer, the only communication tool I had was a nightstick. When late at night you could knock that on the sidewalk and the guy maybe 3 blocks away would hear it. You had no radio, you had no cell phone, no nothing. You could go in to an apartment building and disappear, and they wouldn't know for a couple of hours that you didn't ring. You'd go to a police call box. They used to have them like every 5 or 6 blocks if it worked. But you could be really, and it happened, that police officers got in the middle of a thing and got hurt because they weren't able to communicate. So the first radios they gave us were about that size. Nobody wanted to carry them. I mean, it was terrible. Bulletproof vests, okay? Big bulletproof vest. In a police car, there were no air conditioners. And in the summertime, you felt like that engine was on your lap. And it really took a long time before the police, because a lot of guys wouldn't wear them. They were too heavy, okay? Kelvar, whatever it was. This technology was coming, but now police officers have cell phones out in the street. So it's there for them, and the communication is terrific. But again, during my time, there wasn't a lot of that, so it was difficult. But
always got the job done.
I'm sorry?
You always got the job done.
Yes, yeah, well, I tell you what, we did, because we loved the job. And the ironic part about it, when you first started, the guys in the car didn't talk to you. They just ride by. You'd go to wave to them, and they'd look the other way, because you were a rookie. And I mean, you were on your own. Fortunately, I came to the precinct by myself, so I didn't have any, sometimes send 2 or 3 guys from the academy. I was by my lonesome. So I had to kind of figure my way. But hey, listen, it was special. And the good news, where I worked, I met all kinds of very, very famous people. I won't start name dropping now, because we'll be all about one of the best ones that I met, Mary Tyler Moore. She was just as great as she was on television. Can I make you coffee, Lieutenant? No, no, please. Here she got her apartment burglarized, and she wants to make me coffee. Unbelievable.
Was there any questions from the audience? I know that, and so we're going to be wrapping things up, because unfortunately we're going to get kicked out here in a little bit. But I did want to see if there's any questions from the audience, and then make sure you come and talk to Kevin here. He's outstanding. Get a few minutes at least to exchange, have that exchange. Grab some food on the way out as well. But are there any questions from? Do you guys? Oh, go ahead.
Given everything that you have experienced,
Sorry?
Given everything you've experienced throughout the entirety of your career, if you could have a conversation with your younger self, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, wow. That's a great question. I actually, when I started writing the book, and what happened is I merged baseball with it, and as I started writing it, I almost couldn't believe it myself that all this happened. Because, again, I was from the South Bronx. You know, nobody would have bought any stock in me. I was not a college graduate. I was 22 years old and going no place fast. And the police department got me to see myself and what I needed to do. And the critical part about it was I realized that I did have a talent, and that was dealing with people. I was open, I was honest. I didn't, you know, I grew up in a you know, neighborhood. Our teams were Spanish, black, Jewish, Irish, German. I mean, we were all American pie. I mean, we're all mixed together, and we cared about each other, and it was a wonderful feeling of camaraderie. So when I got put, whether it was I went to school in Harlem, 4 years, Rice High School, and I was comfortable in any neighborhood they put me in. But there were some nights, and there was one night I remember when Martin Luther King was killed, and Harlem went, and I got sent up there at 9 o'clock at night, and I mean, it was really a bad night, and we were out there, and I mean, obviously we're tired, beaten, no food, no nothing. They're throwing bricks down off rooftops. It was breaking stores down. I got hit with a bottle in the forehead, a Miller. They used to have these little 8-ounce Miller bottles, and I got hit in the head with it, and you know, and then at the end at 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, things had quieted down, and they had brought us up there in police wagons, etc. They said, dismissed. In other words, find your way back to the precinct. We looked like hell. We had to get on the subway, and then people were looking like, look at these guys, you know. And got back to the precinct. There was, you know, no food, no nothing, just go change your clothes and come back tomorrow. But I keep saying, but I loved it. It was what it was about. It was about staying with it, you know, not quitting and not anything like that. So I think, talking to myself, I think I would say, Kev, you made a good decision. So it's, and like I say, the best part of it is talking with you guys. Tell you about what was going on at the time, and that as crazy as things are now, and they are crazy, that people like you can really get in the middle of it, survive it, and make a difference, and make people better because of who you are. That's really important, being able to look in that mirror. And not that you're not going to make mistakes. God knows I made a lot of them. But keep getting back up. You know, Peter Ueberroth, the ex-commissioner, said to me one time, you know, Kev, you're either moving ahead or sliding back. There's nobody standing still. You may not move very far ahead one day, but maybe you get an inch or two or something. But you stay with it. You recover. Come back. and make tomorrow a little bit better. And maybe make somebody else's tomorrow a little bit better. That's what it's supposed to be about. It really is important. It's not all about us and who we are and what we do, or what good fortune we had. And again, because people believed in me. I didn't really know anybody, but I tried to work hard. I tried, keep going. I didn't have a hook. I spent 7 years in uniform, which is a long time if you're going to try and be a detective. They wanted me to go to plainclothes, Vice Division, and I knew there were not good things going on in the Vice Division with organized crime and gambling and payoffs and stuff. I didn't want any part of it, so I stayed in uniform, continued to do the job. And I had a partner who was the same way, a terrific guy. And people would, wonder about us. Why are they doing this? They're here almost 7 years. They're not going anyplace. And then we realized we weren't going anyplace, and we had to start to study. And we did. We started going to college. We started studying for promotion. And seniority was a big thing. The first test, I wrote my best mark, but I only had a couple of years in the job. And I think seniority was like 70% of the mark or some crazy thing like that. Next test, they said top 600 for sergeant, top marks. And I was right up near the top. And I got promoted. And when I made lieutenant, it was the same thing, top 300. No seniority, no medals, nothing counts until no veterans points, until your mark was going to be the thing that was going to get you on the list. And that's when, then unfortunately, I never got to make captain because there were no tests for so many years. But I got commander's money, the police commissioner, when I had the Joint Terrorism Task Force with the FBI. I got commander's money, which was half captain's money. I also, and I'll close with this, really, the Brinks case in Rockland County in Nyack. I don't know if any of you remember that. That was back in 1981. I guess you wouldn't remember it. 1981 in Nyack. 2 police officers and a Brinks guard were killed. I have a ceremony every year over there. As you go on the thruway, you see the memorial there. I knew 2 of those police officers. And I ended up the lead investigator in that case. And it went on for 5 years. And we had 5 different terrorist groups involved with it. And one of them just died there a month ago, Matul Shakur. He was the guy who planned the whole thing. And that was a tremendous case. And like I said, we had 7 other major groups. The FALN put down 5 bombs. And this was another intimidating moment in my career. I had just got to the Terrorist Task Force. And I guess a month into it, New Year's Eve, I was just got to a party in New City. And my daughter called, said, you got to call the FBI right away. And they said, there's been a bombing in Manhattan. Well, there were 5 bombs, and 3 in Manhattan, 2 in Brooklyn. And then police officers seriously injured. And I got out of my car down by police headquarters, and all the lights and the ambulances and the police and and I got out of my car and I looked and I said, I questioned. I didn't have any expertise in terrorism. I said, I thought to myself, really, the first time I really questioned myself, can I make a difference here in this? And really, it was obviously a learning, but the great thing about it, there were really good people, FBI agents and New York City detectives, who were just absolutely terrific and allowed me to learn and at the same time be the boss. It was terrific, and I traveled all over the United States, overseas. It was a tremendous experience. I got involved, again, the Olympics with Sports Illustrated, but after that, baseball had me going to the Olympics. And Super Bowls I went to because I worked very close with the other leagues. I promise I'll finish with this. I ran a symposium, I called it, I got the NFL, National Hockey League, and NBA, and Major League Soccer to do a symposium to bring all of their security people to Lansdowne, Virginia, to a conference center. And what I did was I had the New York security people for the leagues sit together, the Chicago guys from the different leagues all sit together from all the different cities so they get to know each other because we were dealing with the same adversary. We were looking to protect our professional sports. I brought Michael Francis there, and I also, the director of the FBI came to it, and I brought Donnie. The movie was made about this guy who infiltrated FBI, infiltrated organized crime for 5 years. He was there, and the head of gambling. I mean, it was a terrific presentation we had, but the good news was the cross-fertilization of the security people getting to know each other. And so they, even in the off-season, they were talking about some of the characters that were involved in trying to get close to players and stuff like that. So there's just so much to do. And the good news was baseball and the FBI and PD let me do it, because I had good people that I trusted and I knew could make a difference.